Thank you all for coming and listening to this impromptu speech on a trip to the South Pole. It sort of falls into three parts, and on the gravestone of Captain Scott in the South in Antarctica is the statement from Lord Tennyson to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. And the story of his trip to the South Pole is quite extraordinary. Anyway, this talk is actually about surviving cancer, saving the NHS and public service broadcasting, but that's the reason I'm going to the South Pole. It's 103, incidentally that was me walking up and down Hadrian's Wall a couple of weekends ago, so I'll come back to that. Anyway, it's 103 years since Scott had his tragic trip to the South Pole. It's 100 years since Shackleton set off for the South Pole. And in this case of Scott, he left in 1910, and by January 1912 he had lost all but 4 men. And then, of course, by the 29th of March 1912, all the last of them died, and his heroic efforts, as any of you don't know, he was trying to be the first man to get to the South Pole, but he was beaten by Amazon, the Norwegians, who got there 5 weeks earlier. The Shackleton is the complete reverse of Scott, in the sense that he left with 27 men, was it? Yes, about 27 men. They were attempting to do the same thing. The ship got stuck in the ice, and that's the ship which eventually got crushed in the ice. They lived for a whole year. I mean, I don't quite know how they did it. With a tweed jacket and a tie, they somehow managed to live for a whole year, floating around on lumps of ice. And eventually he managed to rescue the whole lot of them and get them back to civilization. This boat gets completely destroyed. This boat, I mean, there's an amazing story about this, because in the end he had to leave all of the chaps. There's a very good book which I can recommend, which you can download on Amazon, which I did recently for free. It might cost you 50p now, but it was for free, called South, and it's Shackleton's description of this. Anyway, he and 3 or 4 other guys set off in this tiny sailing boat eventually, having broken through the ice, sailed all the way to South Georgia. When they got to South Georgia, they got to the wrong side of the island. They then had to climb over the top of South Georgia in deep snow in order to get to civilization, to get the rescue people. And then I think it then took them 3 attempts to get the rescue boat back to where the chaps were on Antarctica, and he got them all home safely. The extraordinary thing is that I read recently that the SAS tried to replicate just the walk over South Georgia. So they hadn't spent a year floating around on ice blocks and then sailing in a dinghy 1,000 kilometres to get 1,000 kilometres in this boat to get to Georgia in freezing. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Anyway, these SAS guys turned up and they almost didn't make it, just climbing over South Georgia. So it just shows you how extraordinary their feat was. The really sad part about it is that when Shackleton came back, they all went off to war, and many of his party were killed in the trenches. But just extraordinary. After that triumph of human survival, they got wiped out in the trenches. What about the South Pole? Extraordinary statistics. It holds 90% of the world's water. It's the driest place on Earth. The ice is 5 kilometres deep, and one of the biggest challenges, which very few people realise, is that when you're trying to get to the South Pole, you're actually walking at an apparent height of 4,000 metres. And for anybody who's done any climbing, there's very little air at 4,000 metres. So it's the biggest challenge is cold, and the other biggest challenge is lack of oxygen. So therefore that's the... And as far as why the South Pole, whoops, I haven't quite got there, but anyway, why the South Pole, it is in the DNA of everybody. We all think about Shackleton and Scott and one thing or another, and we have spent, there's so many romantic tales about it, even though it was a tragedy. And so therefore it seemed to me that as I move you through this talk, you'll see why. If you want to engage people in what I'm really, the objective of going to the South Pole is about, the first thing to do is get their excitement about the South Pole itself. So, and this young lady asked me how much kit I was taking, and I'm not taking much, and the theme...
Much? The whole room's full of...
Shush, I said that you said, is that all I'm taking? So it's my wife interrupting, don't interrupt. But it is creative destruction, so the reason that a 58-year-old can actually get to the South Pole is because the technology behind getting to the South Pole is extraordinary. I've got a yellow brick which transmits my position the whole time. I've got a solar power generator which uploads my iPad and camera. They've got ice runways so that I can actually fly onto the Antarctic, etc., etc. So part of the whole issue is that it's becoming increasingly easy to do things that 100 years ago were virtually impossible. So part of the reasons, why am I standing here? Right, oh there we are, that's why I'm standing here, sorry. So we've not done this before, so I'm getting there. So why am I standing here? So I'm standing here because in the last 24 months I have had my bowels removed, 17 inches of bowels, together with stomach muscles and various other parts of my anatomy. I've had my prostate removed, together with various other pipes and bits and pieces. And I've had skin removed from my back and hands and face and so forth. In other words, I've had 3 doses of pretty serious cancer, which most people would not survive. And so basically the idea is to try and explain to people why I survived and how you can all survive. So the next slide is that technology is amazing. So it comes back to the same issue as constructive destruction. Basically, if cancer's caught early, it doesn't kill anybody, and yet everybody presumes that the moment you mention cancer, that's the end of your life, which is clearly proven not to be the case, although an awful lot of people are still tragically dying for all sorts of different reasons. But one of the key issues is that we tend to live in denial in the UK, and therefore one of the messages I'm trying to get out by this speech, this whole thing, I've got articles going in the Daily Mail and Surrey Mirror and all sorts of other things, is the issue of awareness. If we're aware that there are things you can keep an eye on and so on and so forth, there's a very much greater chance that you can survive cancer, because basically cancer caught early is completely solvable and curable. But I suppose the primary cancer I'm going to go for is bowel cancer, simply because of the 3 I've had. Bowel cancer is the 2nd largest early death killer in the UK, and it's because nobody realises they've got it until it's too late. I'll tell you a story about why I knew I got it. It was purely by chance. And so the message for all of you is to make sure that you take this message with you and talk to people and say it is worth getting yourself tested. So, the other issue is about saving the NHS. Now, the biggest problem that we've got in this country is that the statistics are quite incredible. In this room, 75% of the people in this room are going to have cancer of some sort. But most of you are going to survive. 74% of this room will get to the age of 90. 47% of this room will get to the age of 95. And 20% of this room will get to the age of 100, and that's based upon current statistics. So when you guys get there, probably that will have increased to something like 40 or 50% chance that you will all live to 100. The dilemma, though, for us all is that how do you live with a system that cannot afford, because we have never planned to support an ageing population? And so the issue for saving the NHS is that we all own the problem. Thank you, James, for moving on to that one. So we all own the problem in the sense that we could all, to use an extraordinary expression, die healthily. In other words, you can all get to 90 in pretty good shape, but you've got to look after yourself. And so the issues are about getting yourself checked out, It's about asking your doctor to give you blood tests. Part of the dilemma for the NHS is that they want to treat the cause rather than solve the problem. The problem for the NHS is that if we all owned the problem, if we all looked after ourselves, etc., we would be far less of a drain on the NHS, and therefore the NHS would be affordable. We could pay for it. At the moment, the NHS is running out of money. You're hearing government making announcements every day about, say, the Chelmsford Hospital closing over the weekend because it simply couldn't cope with the amount of people turning up. And so therefore, in the end, the system will break down simply because we have not got the resources to run the National Health Service the way we do at the moment. And I'll give you a quick story about how I got caught and why I'm standing in front of you. And that is because I've been a regular blood donor, and I can only emphasise that if you don't give blood, and kids, when you do get to the age and you can give blood, which I think is over the age of 18, go and give blood. So I gave blood every 6 months of my life from the age of 18 onwards. I went to give blood in 2012, and my iron levels have fallen off a cliff. Didn't think much about it, but they wouldn't let me give blood. They said, go and take some pills, you'll be fine. About a month later, I go and see the doctor to have my PSA checked for my prostate cancer, and I mentioned the fact that I haven't got any iron, that my iron levels, and he said, oh, well, I'll check it, but I'm sure it's fine. 36 hours, he rings me up and says, you shouldn't be able to stand up, you've got so little iron in your body. But because I was so fit, I had sort of compensated for the lack of iron, and therefore got through the whole dilemma. Anyway, to cut a long story short, because of that, I went to hospital. They put the camera up my arse and found the growth, and out comes the bowel cancer, and then it moves on from that. So it's simple things like that, that having saved hopefully quite a few people's lives by giving blood for 30 years, it then saved my life. So it just gives you an idea about how things go round in circles, but how you can save yourself, you can save the National Health Service and so forth. So how do you get this information across? What is the issue about getting this information across? The other theme in this whole thing, so I've talked about cancer, I've talked about the National Health Service, now I'm talking about public service broadcasting. So one of the biggest challenges that we also face in this country is that public service broadcasting is coming to an end. And it's because of this thing. None of you, Gemma for instance, my granddaughter, pays for a licence fee. Why would you? You can access everything on here. So the whole of public service broadcasting is coming to an end. Nobody actually understands how public service broadcasting is funded. It somehow just appears, and so on and so forth. The problem we have as a debate in this country is how we're going to fund public service broadcasting going forward. In 2015, the licence fee has to come up for renewal. In 2016 we have the charter renewal, and when I go and talk to any politician, including the chairman, John Whittingdale, who's the chairman of the Culture and Media Committee in the House of Commons, they don't want to talk about it. Why don't they want to talk about it? Because all politicians know that when you put your head above the parapet and talk about public service broadcasting, everybody has such a passion about it, everybody shoots their head off. And so they're trying not to engage, even though they know they've got to engage about public service broadcasting. The dilemma for us is, if anybody who've ever watched American television, as the statistics point out, there's 16 minutes of advertising for every hour of television, and television in US is absolutely terrible. Even here it's quite high, it's 7 minutes, but of course we all enjoy the BBC, so we don't have to. Public service broadcasting is not just about the BBC, it's about Channel 4, it's about Channel 5, it's about ITV. If we don't have public service broadcasting, how are we going to be able to put out information on the radio and television? How are we going to be able to have a totally independent, universal public access to information? And so I'm using the public service broadcasting dilemma as part of the issue about getting my information across and saving that, and hoping to save it. So coming back to more positive issues, the positive outcomes are that as I keep saying to everybody, eat leaves and take exercise. If you want to survive in this world, and if you want to live to 90 without too much problem, then apart from getting tested, cut down on eating too much red meat, cut down on eating too much fat, salts and sugars, take a balanced diet. Try and look after yourself, and you will get through life and really enjoy life. The biggest problem we also have with the NHS and with the whole of our bodies is that we have got used to this idea that you can abuse your body and you can do whatever you like, you can drink what you like, you can eat what you like, and there will be this free system that will then solve whatever problem you might have in the future. And that free system is coming to an end, like public service broadcasting is coming to an end, because we just don't have the tax revenues to be able to pay for it. I'm going to the South Pole on my own. This guy, you might have seen, Conrad Dickinson. He led the Walking for the Wounded last year. They did about 1 degree, which was about 100 kilometres. It was on ITV. They ran it recently. He is the most extraordinary human being I've ever come across. He has got more world records to his name. He makes Ranulph Fiennes look like a first-year student. He's not, if you've ever heard of Ranulph Fiennes, he's done all sorts of exploration, but this guy has done things that most people couldn't possibly do. We're going to walk 222 kilometres. We're going to do it in somewhere between 10 and 30 days. The reason we're not sure how long it takes is because it depends upon the weather. We could literally be holed up. Part of the reason that Scott died was because he got caught in the most unbelievable storm, and he was within a whisker of finding his food. He'd left stations of food, and he was within a whisker of finding his last food, but A, he couldn't find it, B, they couldn't get out of the tent, C, the storm was so bad. So he could be holed up in a tent for 5 days, 10 days, don't know. But assuming that we're able to make reasonable progress, notwithstanding the issue of height, then we should get there somewhere in the region of 15 days. That's travelling somewhere in the region of 18 to 20 kilometres a day. And we hope to try and arrive on the 103rd anniversary of Scott's arrival at the South Pole, which we're not sure whether it's the 17th or 18th of January, but that's the sort of date of arrival. And what really got me the other day was the fact that after Scott hadn't made it, nobody actually went back to the South Pole until 1956, and it's a bit of a weird coincidence, but both Conrad and I were born in 1956. So there seems to be something in the stars about that. How am I doing it? Well, this is me going on running. I did the Langdale Marathon. I've done the London Parks Marathon. Believe it or not, I've been running a marathon a week for the last few months. I've been walking a marathon a week, and that jacket is full of sand, and that rucksack is full of bricks. That's 30 kilos, and I've been walking. You try walking for 26 miles with 30 kilos on your back. I tell you, it's something. You can see the blood, sweat and tears because that's the Langdale Marathon, and if you've ever run with the wrong t-shirt on, as I was, and you get nipple rash, that is blood, and I tell you what, it was unbelievably painful. And this is me dragging tyres around the Hadrian's Wall, and that's our home and the South Pole, believe it or not. So it's not an awful lot. So to conclude, if you want to track us along, you can track us along by looking at KMG Foundation or Twitter or whatever. These are the charities. The one I haven't mentioned, prostate cancer, I haven't mentioned that only because there is a bit more momentum about the prostate cancer, but they obviously intra-awareness as well. You've probably heard of Movember, which is the way you grow a stupid moustache. I'm on the 1st of December going to be going for Decembeard, which is the bowel cancer, so I'm going to be growing a beard from the 1st of December, which I'm also told I need to do anyway because you don't want to turn up in Antarctic clean shaven. It's very, very painful. And as I say, and the voice of the listener and the viewer is the only charity in the UK which is set up with an independent brief to challenge public service broadcasting, and part of the problem with the BBC is that when they go out to consultation, they've got nobody to consult with because there is nobody to challenge, and they've actually encouraged us to try and get awareness so they can actually say, look, there's an independent body out there that can represent you without influence from the BBC. We don't know what the solution is to public service broad. We don't know whether it should be a licence fee or it should be advertising or it should be by subscription. What we want to do though is get a public debate going, so that one of our challenges is to try and get everybody's right to their MP to engage with media and to go onto Facebook and YouTube and actually start trying to get some sort of momentum going about what is the future for public service broadcasting and how are we going to keep this thing going. And that's it, folks. So, questions?
I was of the understanding that they were going to put your TV licence on council tax.
Well, there's plenty of
possibility.
Possibility of that. Yeah, that's one solution. Another solution is that you have a TV licence that you carry on applying to your TV licence, but every time you want to access TV, you actually have to type in your TV licence to prove that you've got it. The problem with that one is, of course, everybody can borrow everybody's TV licence in the same way everybody does now. So that you've got a family at home, you've only got one TV licence, you have 20 people watching it. The Dutch tried moving it onto taxation and promised that they would have a ring fence, so they would never touch the TV licence arrangement, and that lasted for about 2 years, and then they started cutting funding for their public service broadcasting. Any time that you have any political interference, it seems to me, anywhere in the world with public service broadcasting, the service goes down, the standard disappears, and it's an easy target for politicians to cut. And the great thing about the BBC is it costs only 40p a day, it's universal access, it's free at the point of consumption, and that's why we have this world-class public service broadcasting. But I don't know, you see, I mean...
And it seems that by paying for it through advertising defeats the object of having this service that's...
Well, it's no longer unbiased, is it? Because advertising automatically means that there has to be some subliminal influence on what's being put out there.
Can I add to that public service broadcasting isn't just the BBC, it's also ITV and Channel 4 and Channel 5. So it's not just the issue of the licence fee that's changing, it's also that the mobile service providers are creeping in on the bandwidth that TV's broadcast over. So it could eventually go to an online service which makes it not free at the point of consumption. Because, for example, somebody who can't afford a high bandwidth internet connection won't be able to watch public service broadcasting.
There is huge competition at the moment between mobile operators desperately trying to get hold of, 700 megahertz, which is the current. And if they did that, if they did do that, then you'd all have to reprogram your tellies and so on and so forth, because so that would be another big challenge for us. So we've just got to the digital age, and then we'll find that our set-top boxes won't work anymore.
Patrick, can you just tell us a bit more about how you're going to establish a link between your walk to the poll and saving public service broadcasting? I mean, I appreciate that you've got a concern about it, but how will you link these two?
So the link basically is this, that in order to get the information out about how you save, how can we afford a national health service, in order to get the information out about awareness of cancer and the fact that actually cancer doesn't kill anybody, or shouldn't kill anybody anymore if you catch it early enough. I mean, some people are still sadly going to die, but a huge amount of people. I mean, bowel cancer is an example. Basically, nobody should be dying early death of bowel cancer, because it's a completely solvable cancer if it's caught early. If we haven't got a public service broadcasting system, how are you going to get that information into the public domain? Whether it be on Woman's Hour, because bowel cancer affects men and women, or whether it be on Michael Mosley, who's doing some fantastic programs about diet and health, whether it be David Attenborough talking about the whole interlink between humans and animals.
But my question is about your tactic. How are you going to make a link between your walk and raising those?
Well, simply by doing what I'm doing tonight.
Talks like this everywhere.
Talks like this everywhere. So I've done 3 presentations to investment seminars. I've done presentations to churches. I'm going to be doing presentation tomorrow to the good and the great from the main board of the BBC, amongst others, at a conference that Gemma and I are going to. Tomorrow I'm speaking with the Institute of Directors in a couple of weeks' time, and I'm hoping that before, during and after I will be going to talk to lots of schools, Rotary clubs, anybody who basically, the privilege that I have is that I can do this for free. We've raised all the necessary money to do the trip, and I'm very pleased to be able to give this pro bono presentation to as many people as who want to.
When you're out there in Antarctica hoofing it, you're going to make some sort of link between your daily hoofing and sort of feed into these issues? Basically,
the yellow brick that Gemma referred to that will plot the case. We'll have a satellite phone. We're hoping to get some media coverage so that we will maybe be able to send some broadcasts back. Gemma's going to be running the thing live back here, so anybody linking into our presentation, our website, will be able to see how I'm going and how fast we're getting there and one thing and another. And so yes, I mean, we're hoping. It's one of those things also that it's like the Steve Sutton case, the young man who died of, was it?
Cancer.
Who died of Steve Sutton. Stephen. And he, I mean, he raised £3 million out of nowhere, and he was a young guy, 20. Who died of bowel cancer recently. He raised £3 million, and he just happened to capture the public imagination, and so has an awful lot more people, as a consequence of that tragic case, now know about bowel cancer. I mean, one of the crazy things about this is that you only get a poo test on the National Health Service once you're over 65. And yet all the people who die of bowel cancer early are people like me in their 50s. And if I went into my doctor and said I want a poo test, he'd say, well, you don't qualify. So unless you're prepared to pay for it privately, we're not doing it. And then as a consequence, you then get bowel cancer, and you cost huge amounts of money to get yourself sorted out, because it's all about treating the cause rather than solving the problem.
I should know the answer to this, but why the South Pole? Why not anywhere else?
I would have this is a really good question, and it's something actually I want to talk about, because I feel quite embarrassed about going to the South Pole, because the carbon footprint of doing this is not impressive. I mean, it's, taking a flight onto the Arctic, and the whole thing is, and then getting out of there afterwards, flying all the way down to Punta Arenas. I mean, I would have loved to have done something else. I thought about walking across Siberia and catching the Trans-Siberian Rail train, and then, which is pretty environmentally friendly, and then just hopping off the train and sort of wandering across Siberia. But that doesn't capture the imagination. What does capture the imagination, particularly in this year, 2014, start of the First World War, Shackleton's 100th anniversary of Shackleton, etc., etc. It seemed to me, when I looked at all the best ways of having what was most likely to attract publicity, it seemed to me that actually walking to the South Pole was more likely to engage with the public than anybody else. So I'm using the South Pole, to answer your point, Tim, as the excuse to try and get the message out. And so the South Pole will be an enormous challenge, but actually the biggest challenge. If I just save one person from an early death, I will feel I've achieved something. And if I can get lots of people to respect their bodies and eat better and just be aware, then and that's the National Health Service, to be honest, is catching up with this. They are beginning to try and educate people. There needs to be far more teaching in schools about all of this stuff, and there is not nearly, in my opinion, enough, particularly in probably it does happen here, but particularly in the state sector, there's not nearly enough emphasis on health awareness and exercise and so forth.
And the sort of inspiration for a trip like this, was this something that came during sort of cancer treatment or post-cancer treatment? Was there a particular moment where you thought,
there's a weird story behind this, because when I first discovered I got bowel cancer, I said to my nephew, if I come out of this alive, you're going to take me up Kilimanjaro. And I came out of the operation, and I was incredibly lucky. So I had a 6-hour operation, came back into recovery. I walked out of intensive care 12 hours later, and they chucked me out of hospital within 40 hours, which was somewhat of a surprise to everybody, including the surgeon. But I survived and didn't look back. And so I I emailed my nephew about 50 hours later and said, right, we're going up Kilimanjaro. And his reply was, blimey. Anyway, so...
There you are.
Sorry?
Picture.
Oh right, there we are, yes, there we are, on top of Kilimanjaro. So that was before I realised I had prostate cancer, full-blown prostate cancer. So I walked up Kilimanjaro in the January of 2013, when we did it in 3 days, which normally takes 5 to 7 days. And then when I came down, the following July, I had all my prostate removed and all the pipework and so forth. So it just shows you can actually walk up Kilimanjaro with full-blown prostate cancer without knowing you've got it.
On a second question, and it's quite slightly controversial to the audience, but having been through the cancer, how does your wife feel about you going to the South Pole?
I'm absolutely delighted. I've got a whole month ahead of me without him.
Oh, lovely.
I won't be taking it to another talk.
No, I think he's in good hands, so I'm not that worried.
Yeah, Conrad's well.
I think actually, I mean, it sounds daunting, but the chances of me perishing are pretty small nowadays with the technology and everything else. I was saying to Tim earlier, the biggest challenge is mental stamina. It's not a question of whether I'll survive, it's a question of whether I get there. That's the bigger challenge, because, and if you watch The Help for the Heroes, a film they did, I mean, they only did 100 kilometres, and it was a huge struggle. Oh, okay, they were limbless, some of them were limbless at various different, but I mean, they were still half my age and incredibly fit human beings. And I mean, Prince Harry gave up for a day or so. I mean, he didn't make it, and that was only 100. And he's a pretty fit human being as well.
Fit.
So, and Conrad was Conrad was leading with Prince Harry, and Harry really struggled.
Do you feel prepared?
I sort of go through phases when I feel prepared, and then I feel desperately unprepared. So, at the moment, I've now got a Nordic tracker. So this is one of these skiing machines that you're skiing in the garage, which is unbelievably boring. I can't tell you. When you've done 4 kilometres on this thing, and I'm trying to do 4 kilometres now, not because I'll be able to do 4 kilometres because of the altitude, but I thought if I could get to 4 kilometres now, that maybe I can then therefore do 2.5 kilometres now. But boy, oh boy, doing that. And then the other one I'm doing is dragging, so I've got a circuit in the field next to us, and I'm dragging 3 tyres around, and you do that for half an hour, and apart from the fact that you're completely washed out and knackered, that's pretty boring as well.
And the other thing is this little red tent here.
Yeah.
So this is going to be your house.
Yeah, you cook in this bit, and you come in round the side actually from this bit, but that's basically, and you erect it every night.
And how do you keep warm?
Well, that's the point.
Mm.
You don't.
He
So you have-
snuggles up to Conrad.
So we have amazing sleeping bags and so forth, but you don't take your clothes off. I was saying to this lady earlier that the technology of clothing is that you probably change your clothing 100 times a day, because you mustn't get too hot and you mustn't get too cold. If you get too hot, you start sweating. That's terrible, because you then freeze. The sweat freezes. Because don't forget, I'm doing this at somewhere between averaging -20, but probably there'll be times when it's -50, sometimes when it's -10.
Oh.
So you mustn't get too wet, you mustn't get too hot, and you mustn't get too cold. But with all this technology of layers, you simply keep taking layers off and putting the layers on and taking layers off, and then you get into these sleeping bags which you literally literally bury yourself in. You don't get out of your sleeping bag to have a pee. You pee into a pot in your sleeping bag and you screw up the lid and then you... so there's all sorts of interesting technology that goes on with keeping warm. And basically, yeah, we're carrying all our own cooking equipment, so gas, and then you melt the ice in order to rehydrate your food.
What does penguin taste like?
I don't know, but the other extraordinary thing about having told you shouldn't eat too much fat, of course you have to bear in mind that Shackleton only survived because they kept eating seals and they ate the blubber. And it's the blubber, which has all the vitamins you need, all the proteins you need. In fact, seal blubber is about the perfect food in a way.
An acquired taste.
An acquired taste. But it did keep 27 men alive because they had nothing else but seals to eat.
Will you be checking in with Gemma on a sort of daily basis? Or?
Yes, we have to radio in our position every day. So that will mean that, and hopefully if this yellow brick works, she'll be plotting our course across
Which
the...
anybody can look at, so you'll be able to go to the website and you'll see a little dot crossing over.
Yeah.
And
But we
money-
have to radio our coordinates back to our base because they're obviously tracking us so that if something does happen, they know roughly where to come and look for us.
But we'll also be able to have a quick chit chat every other day or so about
Yeah.
what's going on, so I can tell
With
everybody at
him?
home.
Yeah. Will I?
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
right.
you have a satellite phone.
No excuse.
About 30 seconds.
I know.
Yeah.
And the money you raise, where will that go?
So basically we're hoping to raise £250,000, although, again, to answer Tim's point, it's not about raising money. I mean, the money, I hope to raise some money, but it's not about raising, it's purely about raising awareness, and it's trying to get a debate going, and it's trying to get people to take all these points on board. But
the
basically...
money's going to help, hasn't it, surely?
Yeah, so basically we're going to try and raise £250,000, £250,000, and it will be split between these three, although we've given everybody the option of saying you can put 100% of it to one, or split it three ways, or put 50% into two, whatever. So basically, and obviously as far as bowel cancer is concerned, I've been funding a person at bowel cancer for the last couple of years who has been trying to get awareness out about bowel cancer. So money raised going to them will just carry on that awareness issue from them. Not quite sure what prostate cancer will do, and as far as the voice of the listener is concerned, they will simply be using that again to try and increase the debate and try and get a national debate going about what happens with public service broadcasting.
The reason that the KMG Foundation is up in the corner is because it's very difficult for us to channel the money directly to the charities, so we've had to set up this foundation to take it all into one pot and send it out again at the end of the project.
And also to pick up the gift aid with it, which is obviously quite valuable, and to enable people to claim higher rate tax relief. So I mean, you see, for higher rate taxpayers, it's incredibly valuable because they're getting 45% tax relief on every pound they put in. So it's quite sorry.
Apologies if you covered this at the very beginning, which I missed, but having decided you wanted to go to the South Pole, how did you get in touch with Conrad, and how did you fund the whole project?
So,
Who did you approach?
so the first question, how did I get hold of Conrad? I have to say I did cheat. I've been travelling quite extensively across the world my wife and I have been travelling across the world now for 20 years, I suppose, and we've got to know a chap very, very well, a guy called Roddy Bray, who is a complete freelance. That's all he does. He just puts together stupid missions for people who want to go to crazy places. And so I rang him up and said, well, this is a real challenge for you. And he then had a beauty parade, and he set up a series of people to come that we could interview, and Gemma came to that. And basically, he rode them in one after another, and we interviewed them. And a very interesting story, actually, because when Prince Harry and Conrad were doing the help for wounded thing, they actually chose one of the other people that I interviewed, and Roddy Bray didn't tell me who he thought I should go with, but he let me interview all of them. And one of the other guys appeared to be entirely authentic, but he had actually overpromised and completely underdelivered with the Help for the Heroes thing, to the point where the whole mission They had all the television organised, they had everything set up, they had the royal prince there, and they hadn't done the organisation correctly. So at the last moment they had to ring up Conrad and said, help, you've done this loads of times before, can you get us out of this monumental mess that we're in? And so he took it over right at the last moment and made it happen. But he turned up and he went through all the kit and he said, yes, that's fine. The only thing that doesn't work is the boots. You see, we can't possibly take the boots because you'll all get blisters and you'll never get there. To which they turned around and said, well, we've got to do with the boots because the boots paid for the whole thing. The boot manufacturers have paid for this whole thing. He said, well, I can assure you we won't make it. And if you watch the film, what happens? They all got blisters because the boots were terrible. I can assure you I'm not using those boots, and he got some amazing boots from northern Norway, which I tried and tested over a huge period of time. So that's how we selected, and the way in which I raised the money is that I'm a chartered financial advisor. I do look after a lot of extremely wealthy individuals, and basically they paid for it. So I'm very, very, well, a combination of that and me, I had some money as well, but basically, yes, I'm extremely privileged to have been able to say that there's about a dozen people who have basically, because the whole operation has cost £125,000 to put together.
Why only 2 of you?
Because I don't like people that much.
It would be more expensive as well.
Yeah, I mean, but exponentially. I mean, you know, if it was 4, it would be 250,000. No, it wasn't. There's not quite that, because the 125,000 also covers everything, including all the media and trying to do all the exposure, everything. So it's not just about. So I said to these people, you know, it's not just about getting to the South Pole, although that's quite expensive, but it's all the rest of it. Yeah, actually, the biggest reason for not taking more people, I mean, I had sort of mentioned a couple of people, is that the more people, you can only go at one person's speed, the more chances of something going wrong, somebody getting sick, something else happening, something breaking, so forth. So actually, if you've got the right guy and you've got the right equipment and one thing or another, actually, it's much, much easier to just do it. And then we can go entirely at our own pace. We're exactly the same age, we're roughly the same fitness. It makes life a bit easier.
So do you have sort of contingency plans of, you know, if you were to trip over an ice hole or something?
No.
No.
No. No, I mean, we don't, apart from a satellite phone, so we can hopefully make contact with somebody, and and I suppose the reverse of that is, if we don't radio in, then they'll know where we last were, and so they'll come looking for us.
And what happens? I mean, if they have to come searching for you, I mean,
well, hopefully the
do you have
yellow
to pay
brick.
for that, or what? You know.
Oh no, that's part of the cost. So,
Right,
so
okay.
yes. So I mean, the huge amount of cost is actually the whole, the insurance, the backup, you know, what do you do when you get to the? I mean, it's extraordinary when you get to the base station at the South Pole, because there's a permanent base station at the South Pole, which is full of mad scientists, and they're so mad, would you believe it, that they don't allow anybody into their station, including Prince Harry. So you arrive, and there's all these buildings and people wandering around in t-shirts at -50, because they're all in these wonderful buildings, and they despise anybody going there, which in a way I can see why, because it's a pure environmental area and they're doing scientific research and one thing and another. But I mean, there aren't that many people that get down there, and there's only a window of about 2.5 months when they can get down there, and you would have thought they could be. So anyway, they refused to allow even Prince Harry in, and yet they all came out and asked if they could have their photograph taken with him, to which he said no. So, but part of the cost is get there, somebody's then got to take you back out, and I think the way in which it works is that in this sort of 2.5 months they're restocking the South Pole station the whole time, so the flight's coming in, and I think the way in which it works is that one of these flights will disgorge all its fuel and food and all the rest of it, and then we hop in the back of it and it flies us back out. So that's it is seriously expensive flying across. Antarctica. It really is unbelievably expensive because of the temperature and the quality of the machinery that they have to have and the fuel that they use. I mean, you're basically hiring a stonking great 4-engine jet to fly 2 people back out of the place. So, to a certain extent, they can charge what they like. And we didn't fancy walking all the way back.
Right.
And it's
I'll
quite
miss
difficult.
you.
Sorry?
And I'll miss you if you're taking any longer.
Yeah. I mean, there is a bit of a dilemma here also, and that is that if we don't make it in the time slot, then I will be gone a long time.
I'll be really displeased because I'll have to rearrange the flights.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, if we miss the last flight out from the South Pole, then I'm there for a year because you can't get out. So there is a sort of bit of a critical point. So I mean,
take a Scrabble board.
Sorry?
Maybe travel Scrabble.
So what is the last point? What is there a sort of a deadline date?
There is. What is the
I
deadline?
don't know the exact deadline. It's whenever winter falls, I guess. and the
No, there is
sunset.
there is a
Oh,
specific
must be.
deadline. It's something like the last
Well, you're doing
time that they can
21st.
take it is something early. It's early in February, so there's a window basically from. Don't forget, Scott basically died in early March because the weather had become unbearable by then, and so the window is basically from now, mid-November, through to the end of January. That's
And
really
is that because weather makes flights
Yeah.
impossible?
And why did you not choose to do it earlier? So you've got a bigger window.
because, believe it or not, that was the only slot available to me.
Their flights sell out from South America to Antarctica, which is unreal.
Well, because
Well, I
there's
guess
so few
they're
of them.
limited.
Yeah, because there's so few of them. I mean, you basically, when we get to Punta Arenas, we then fly across on a Russian cargo plane, in amongst sort of boxes and all sorts of stuff. And actually, just I haven't told you this, but basically what happens is you go to Punta Arenas, you then get yourself together, you then load your kit on a sledge onto a cargo plane, you go across to a place called Union Glacier, where you start your pre-training and you start your acclimatisation, because if you went straight up to the top of the thing, don't forget that this is 5 miles of ice beneath us. That really is very shocking to the system, and you just can't. So you basically, it's a bit like a sort of battle plan. You sort of slowly move your way forward, and you graduate your way up through the glacier, and until you get to the point at which. So basically, it's going to take us about 8 days, no, slightly less than that, 6 or 7 days to acclimatise before we can then start our walk.
So the terrain is actually glaciated, so there's crevasses as well as mountains to negotiate.
It's really difficult to know, because in theory, you saw all those photographs. I mean, this one
That
looks
looks very flat.
absolutely deadpan. You can go to bed, a storm comes up, it's a bit like being in the desert, and suddenly you wake up in the morning and the landscape has completely changed out of all recognition. It's what they call strudeli, which is basically large lumps of ice. But so you can have a flat terrain, you can find yourself literally crawling over huge mountains of ice, large lumps, huge great snowdrifts appear out of nowhere. And so therefore, again, you just don't really know what the terrain's going to be until you've actually got there.
And it is crevassed.
There are crevasses,
So you
yes.
could
Yes. But they, yes, there are.
potentially slip in one.
Yes, you can do. Yeah.
So do you travel? Are you roped together when you're?
No, you don't tend to be. You tend to travel apart from each other, and the crevasses. I mean, I've done a lot of crevasse stuff in the Alps, so I do know quite a lot about crevasses and where to go and where not to go. Well, I don't know an awful lot, which is why I always take a guide. But I do know something about crevasses, and so yes, you don't tend to be too close together in case. But basically, the Antarctic plateau has been there for such a long time, and it is so well formed. It's not a moving glacier in the same sense. If you go to the Beardmore Glacier where Scott came up, then you've got massive crevasses and so forth, which you have to get through and get over and so forth. Once you get more into the centre, it's pretty permanent, and the snow tends to fill in the gaps, and the ice isn't moving so fast. Although it is moving, it's sort of doing this all the time, so the South Pole is sort of stretching out all the time. And that's the issue. But yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of anybody that's actually been lost in a crevasse in Antarctica once you get to where we're going to be walking from.
And are you taking any luxuries?
None at all.
None at all. Nothing.
Nothing.
Chilies.
It's not a luxury, but you're taking your iPhone, which I think is quite amazing.
It's
Well, yeah.
amazing that it would work in those
It's never
temperatures.
cold. The battery life is massively depleted.
My iPhone doesn't even work in hers.
It won't be for phone calls.
It's
It's the
cold,
camera,
yeah.
isn't it?
It's for the camera, yeah.
And
It's
you can
basically.
also link it to the Yellow Brick, which is the Iridium tracker, and it can send out messages to civilization via your iPhone.
Yeah.
Which I don't suppose I've showed you yet.
No, we haven't done
You will
any.
be able to do
Yes,
that.
we haven't done any. And I've got a special watch as well, haven't I,
Yeah.
which is.
Altimeter, barometer.
You're like James Bond, aren't you?
Yeah. Except that I actually don't know how any of this lot works yet. So that's my next challenge, is to
You
work
queue.
out how these
Are you
things.
cute?
I'm hoping Jack's going to be my backup queue.
Yes. Yeah.
How will you celebrate once you reach the South
I
Pole?
don't know. I think I'll just be so very grateful to be there that I don't think there will
Where
be,
goes
because
the sleep?
as I say, I'm told we won't be allowed into the research station. So you basically pitch your tent and wait for a flight. So.
No,
You
that's
haven't
a bit
said
of a
that you
actually.
have to walk 2 hours, rest for 15 minutes, walk for another 2
Oh yeah,
hours.
so yeah, okay. So that, yes, this is so. What's that? What's every day? So every day you wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I said, why do you get up at 6 o'clock if we're not leaving till 9? And he said, because it takes you 3 hours, because you're at such height, to actually wind your body up, cook your food, take your tent down, pack your kit away, get yourself going, and then you do 2 hours walking, 15-minute break. 2 hours walking, 15-minute break, 2 hours walking, 15-minute break, 1 3/4 hours walking, and stop. And you do that every day for however long it takes to get to the South Pole. So that's where physical and mental stamina
Yeah, I'd say.
really come into it.
And it's just snow and blue sky.
But all I can tell you is that having walked in
The
the garage
penguin.
for hours on end, I can't believe anything can be worse than trying to do it in a wretched garage.
Yeah.
And what
So-
sort of kit, first aid kit would you take with you, for frostbite, or are you very confident in your...
Yeah, what
In your
about
gear.
frostbite?
So basically, Conrad, who's done an awful lot of this. I mean, if you saw some of the stuff that he walked to the North Pole recently, which, as you know, is floating, and it's all beginning to break up. And I mean, he fell in 3 times just getting there. I mean, can you imagine? So he's soaking wet and freezing cold, and he still managed to get there. Anyway, he has got every conceivable piece of kit that can possibly be. But the idea basically is not to get injured. I mean, you get skeletal damage and you get muscle damage, but you just try and make sure you get through it. So at the moment I'm taking a whole load of what are they pills? Glucosamine pills, and various others. So I'm trying to keep the joints in good shape. And the diet you eat, it tries to have as many things like zinc and magnesium and all the vitamins and so on and so forth, so that you'll because I personally tend to suffer from hypoglycemia, which is where you sweat the stuff out of your body quite rapidly. But no, it's really about, and it's also about checking ourselves, so that you're constantly looking at each other to make sure that you haven't got frostbite, and you're constantly checking to make sure. So you don't do a daft thing like Ranulph Fiennes did, where you take your gloves off to adjust your skis, and then obviously lose your fingers.
You have 3 or 4 pairs of gloves on all the time?
6. Well, I have a potential for 6 pairs of gloves, but probably wearing between 2 and 3 pairs of gloves all the time. And what you do is you rotate. So I have 2 sets of goggles and sunglasses, and you rotate your goggles so that as one gets steamed or moist, you put them into your inside, and then you put the other ones on, and all that sort of stuff. So there's not a lot of you that's exposed to anything. And hopefully if you turn up in reasonably good health, then you're not likely to catch any bugs. So it's only really physical injury that's likely to slow you down. And hopefully we won't get blisters.
Do you do anything like sort of test yourself before you actually start the walk, once you arrive in Antarctica, to check that you haven't potentially caught
The
flu
Ebola.
or something, and you know.
Not that I'm aware of, but I'll tell you when they come back. Because there will be a sequel, I hope, which will be
Yeah, so you're doing
a
an after.
full-on film, which is partly why I'm taking so we bought a special camera, so I'm going to try and record as much as I can, and then there's the phone, so I'm going to try and,
Right in every
so
direction.
we're going to try and put together a film of the whole thing, and